The stagecoach rattled into Sonora, California on a scorching September afternoon in 1878, carrying a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Theresa Owens pressed her palm against the dusty window, watching the small mining town emerge from the golden hills like a mirage. At 22 years old, she had traveled alone from Missouri, fleeing the suffocating expectations of her aunt's household and the marriage proposals from men who saw her only as another piece of property to acquire. The advertisement in the newspaper had been simple. Harvest workers needed in California, good wages, room and board included. She had sewn her savings into the hem of her skirt and left before dawn without looking back. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the Wells Fargo office, and Theresa gathered her carpet bag and the canvas satchel containing everything she owned. The California heat hit her like a furnace as she stepped down, so different from the humid Missouri summers she knew. Dust coated everything, turning the world sepia and gold. "You the harvest worker?" A gruff voice called from across the street. Theresa turned to see an older man with a weathered face and suspicious eyes. He wore a sweat-stained hat and held the reins of a wagon pulled by two mules. "I am Theresa Owens." She straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. "Figured you'd be a man." He spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Name's Howard. The Navarro Ranch sent me to collect whoever answered the advertisement. You sure you can handle harvest work? It ain't easy." "I grew up working a farm. I can handle it." Howard grunted, neither convinced nor entirely dismissive. "Throw your bags in the back. It's an hour's ride." The journey took them through rolling hills dotted with oak trees, past streams that ran shallow in the late summer drought, and finally into a valley where orderly rows of crops stretched toward distant mountains. The Navarro Ranch was larger than Theresa had expected, with a main house built of adobe and wood, several outbuildings, a barn and workers' quarters that looked recently constructed. As Howard pulled the wagon to a stop, a man emerged from the barn, and Theresa felt her breath catch in her chest. He was tall and lean, moving with an easy confidence that spoke of someone completely at home in his body and his world. Dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and when he removed his hat to wipe his brow, she saw a face that was both rugged and surprisingly gentle, with eyes the color of creek water in winter. "This is the harvest worker," Howard announced with barely concealed skepticism. "Says she can handle the work." The man's gaze found Theresa's, and she saw surprise flicker across his features before something else replaced it, something warmer and more curious. He approached the wagon, offering his hand to help her down. "Robert Navarro," he said, his voice low and steady. "This is my ranch. I apologize for Howard's manners. We're glad to have help, regardless of who provides it." His hand was calloused and strong, and when Theresa placed hers in it, she felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with the California sun. "Theresa Owens." "I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Navarro." "Robert," he corrected, still holding her hand a moment longer than necessary before seeming to realize it and letting go. A faint color rose in his cheeks beneath his tan. "Let me show you to your quarters. We have a separate cabin for you. It's not much, but it's clean and private." He insisted on carrying her bags despite her protests, leading her past the workers' bunkhouse to a small cabin set slightly apart. It was simple but well-maintained, with a bed, a table, a chair, and a small stove. Wildflowers in a jar sat on the table, and Theresa wondered who had placed them there. "My mother's idea," Robert said, catching her looking at them. "She passed 2 years ago, but she always believed in welcoming people properly. I've tried to keep up her traditions. They're lovely, thank you." Robert set her bags down, then turned to face her, his expression serious. "I should be honest with you, Miss Owens. The work will be hard. We're harvesting wheat and barley, and there's the vegetable garden, the orchard. We have 5 other workers, all men, and I'll make sure they treat you with respect or answer to me. Meals are provided at the main house, breakfast at dawn, lunch at noon, supper at dusk. Sundays are half days. The wages are as advertised, paid weekly. That's more than fair. One more thing." He hesitated, his Winter Creek eyes searching her face. "Why did you come all the way to California? You're educated, I can tell by the way you speak. You could have found easier work back east." Theresa considered how much to reveal to this stranger who would be her employer. Something in his honest gaze made her want to tell the truth. "I needed to go somewhere I could be my own person, make my own choices. Missouri felt like a cage. California felt like possibility." Robert nodded slowly, understanding lighting his features. "I know something about that. I left Texas for similar reasons when I was 20. Built this place from nothing over the past 6 years." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Welcome to Sonora, Miss Owens. I hope you find what you're looking for here." After he left, Theresa sat on the edge of the bed, her heart still beating faster than the heat warranted. She had come to California for freedom and wages, not to feel drawn to a man she had just met. But there had been something in the way Robert Navarro looked at her, as if he saw not just a worker or a woman, but a whole person with dreams and depth. She unpacked her few belongings, changed into her work dress, and braided her dark blonde hair tightly. Whatever attraction she felt needed to be set aside. She was here to work, to earn money, to build a life of her own choosing. The dinner bell rang as the sun began its descent, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose. Theresa made her way to the main house, where a long table had been set up on the covered porch. The other workers were already gathering, and their conversation stopped abruptly when she appeared. "Boys," Robert's voice cut through the awkward silence, "this is Miss Theresa Owens. She'll be working harvest with us. I expect you to treat her like you'd treat your sisters, with respect and courtesy." The men nodded, some curious, some skeptical, one or two openly appraising, until Robert's sharp look made them redirect their attention to their plates. An older Mexican woman emerged from the kitchen carrying platters of food, her face breaking into a warm smile when she saw Theresa. "Ah, another woman at last. I am Maria. I cook and keep house for Mr. Robert. Come, sit, eat. You must be starving after your journey." The meal was simple but delicious. Beans and rice with fresh tortillas, roasted chicken, and vegetables from the garden. Theresa found herself seated across from Robert, who asked her about her journey west while the other men talked among themselves. She learned that he was 28, that his father had been a vaquero from Mexico, who married an American woman and taught his son everything about ranching before dying when Robert was 16. His mother had been a school teacher, insisting Robert learn to read and write and keep accounts, skills that had helped him build his ranch into a successful enterprise. "What do you grow besides wheat and barley?" Theresa asked, genuinely interested. Robert's face lit up as he described his crops, his plans to expand the orchard, his hopes to bring in cattle next year. He spoke about the land with a passion that was infectious, and Theresa found herself drawn into the conversation, asking questions, offering observations from her own farming experience. The other workers' skepticism seemed to soften as they listened to her demonstrate knowledge of crop rotation and irrigation. When the meal ended, and the men drifted off to the bunkhouse, Robert walked Theresa back to her cabin. The night air had cooled, bringing relief from the day's heat, and stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "You surprised them," Robert said, his voice warm with approval. They expected someone who didn't know a plow from a pitchfork. People often expect less of women. I'm used to exceeding those expectations. I'm starting to see that. He paused outside her cabin door. We start at dawn. I'll wake you when it's time for breakfast. I'll be ready. He tipped his hat, lingering for a moment as if wanting to say something more, then wished her good night and walked back toward the main house. Theresa watched him go, silhouetted against the lamplight, and felt that dangerous flutter in her chest again. The next morning arrived cold and gray, autumn asserting itself despite the calendar still claiming summer. Theresa woke before Robert's knock, dressed in her sturdy work clothes, and met him at the main house as the sky began to lighten. Maria had prepared coffee strong enough to wake the dead and thick slices of bread with butter and jam. "You'll need your strength," Maria said, pressing a second slice into Theresa's hand. "The harvest is hard work, especially for someone with your slender arms." But Theresa's slender arms had deceptive strength, built from years of farm work before her father died, and her aunt had insisted she learn to be a lady instead. She worked alongside the men in the wheat fields, wielding a scythe with practiced efficiency, binding sheaves, loading wagons. The work was back-breaking and monotonous, the sun relentless once it burned off the morning chill, but there was also something deeply satisfying about it, about the physical exhaustion and visible progress. Robert worked harder than anyone, leading by example rather than command. He helped wherever an extra hand was needed, encouraged when someone flagged, and never asked anything of his workers he would not do himself. Theresa watched him when she thought he was not looking, admiring not just his physical strength, but the way he treated everyone with fairness and respect, regardless of whether they were Mexican or white, experienced or green. She caught him watching her too, his expression thoughtful and something more than professional interest. Their eyes would meet across the field, and a silent understanding would pass between them, acknowledgement of an attraction neither could quite ignore. Days fell into a rhythm. Up at dawn, work until the sun made it dangerous to continue, lunch in the shade of the oak trees, more work until dusk, supper on the porch, exhausted sleep, then beginning again. Theresa's hands blistered, then calloused. Her back ached, then strengthened. The other workers accepted her presence, then her competence, then began to treat her as one of the crew, joking and talking freely in her presence. 2 weeks into the harvest, a wagon wheel broke while fully loaded with wheat sheaves. Robert and 2 other men struggled to lift the wagon high enough to remove the broken wheel, but the weight was too much. Without hesitation, Theresa grabbed a long plank and used it as a lever, adding her strength to theirs. Together they managed to raise the wagon just enough. "Quick thinking," Robert said afterward, breathing hard from the exertion. Sweat darkened his shirt and dust streaked his face. "Where did you learn that, my father?" He was good at figuring out how to make work easier with the right tools and leverage. It was the first time she had mentioned her father, and something in her voice must have conveyed her loss. "How long has he been gone?" Robert asked gently. 5 years. He got sick one winter and never recovered. After that, everything fell apart. We lost the farm, and I went to live with my aunt in St. Louis. She meant well, but we wanted different things for my life. "What did you want?" Theresa looked out at the golden fields, the distant mountains, the endless sky. "This. To work with my hands, to see the results of my labor, to be free to make my own choices, to not be someone's ornament or burden." "You could never be either of those things," Robert said quietly, and when Theresa looked at him, the intensity in his gaze made her heart race. "You're one of the best workers I have, and the bravest person I have met in a long while." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, before one of the other workers called for Robert's help with the replacement wheel. He went, but not before his fingers briefly touched Theresa's arm, a fleeting contact that burned through the fabric of her sleeve and stayed with her the rest of the day. That evening, after supper, Robert asked if she would like to see the orchard. The sun was setting, turning the sky into a masterpiece of orange and purple, and the orchard provided a peaceful escape from the constant activity of the harvest. They walked between rows of apple and pear trees, their branches heavy with ripening fruit. Robert explained his plans to expand, to plant peaches and cherries, to build a proper irrigation system. His enthusiasm was contagious, and Theresa found herself offering suggestions, drawing on her father's knowledge and her own observations. "You have a real understanding of this work," Robert said, plucking an apple from a low branch and offering it to her. "It's more than just labor for you. It's life," Theresa said simply, accepting the apple and biting into it. The juice was sweet and tart simultaneously, tasting like the California sunshine that had ripened it. "Everything we eat, everything we use, it all comes from the land and the people who work it. There's honor in that and satisfaction. Not many people see it that way. Most view it as beneath them if they have any other option. Then most people are fools." Robert laughed, a genuine sound of delight that transformed his usually serious face. "You don't mince words, do you? Life's too short for false politeness. My father taught me that too." They had reached the far edge of the orchard, where the land sloped down toward a creek. The water ran low this late in the season, but the sound of it was soothing, and willow trees provided a canopy of green. Robert gestured to a fallen log that served as a natural bench. "I come here sometimes when I need to think," he admitted, sitting down and looking out at the land he had built. "When everything feels overwhelming, or when I miss my parents, or when I wonder if I'm doing the right things." Theresa sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "It seems to me you're doing everything right. This ranch is beautiful and productive. Your workers respect you. You have built something real and lasting. But it's incomplete." Robert turned to look at her, and the vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. "A ranch needs more than just one person. It needs family, partnership, a future beyond just the next harvest." The implication hung in the air between them, and Theresa's pulse quickened. She wanted to reach for his hand, to close the distance between them, to acknowledge what had been growing since the moment she stepped off that wagon. But fear held her back, fear of misunderstanding, of complicating her employment, of wanting something that might not be offered. Robert seemed to sense her hesitation. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "I should get you back before it's full dark. Maria will scold me for keeping you out." They walked back in companionable silence, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that could no longer be entirely ignored. The harvest continued through September and into October. The wheat and barley were gathered and stored, and the work shifted to the vegetable garden and orchard. The days grew shorter and cooler, the light taking on the golden quality particular to autumn. Theresa's contract would end in November, when the harvest was complete, and she would need to decide what came next. The question weighed on her as she worked alongside Robert, as they shared meals and conversations, as their accidental touches became less accidental and lingered longer. She had been happy these past weeks, happier than she could remember being in years. The work satisfied her, the landscape had captured her heart, and Robert had become far more important to her than any employer should be. One afternoon in late October, as they were picking the last of the apples, dark clouds began gathering in the west. The temperature dropped rapidly and the wind picked up, sending leaves swirling through the orchard. "Storm coming," Robert said, looking at the sky with concern. "A bad one by the look of it. We need to get everything secured." They worked quickly, calling in the other workers, getting the animals into the barn, securing doors and shutters. The storm hit just as they finished, rain falling in sheets driven nearly horizontal by the wind. Thunder cracked overhead, and lightning illuminated the valley in stark flashes. Robert insisted everyone wait out the worst of it in the main house, rather than risk the run to the bunkhouse or Theresa's cabin. They crowded into the main room, dripping water onto Maria's floors despite her having laid down old blankets. She brought out coffee and leftover cornbread, fussing over everyone like a mother hen. The storm raged for hours, one of those autumn tempests that seemed determined to remind humans of nature's power. The workers played cards, told stories, and eventually some fell asleep in their chairs. Theresa stood at the window, watching the lightning dance across the sky, feeling the house shake with each thunderclap. Robert came to stand beside her, 2 fresh cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one, and she accepted gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm tin. "Quite a storm," he said quietly, not wanting to wake the sleeping men. "It's magnificent, terrifying but magnificent." "That's one way to look at it. I'm mainly worried about crop damage and flooding." "Always the rancher," Theresa said with a slight smile. "Can't you just appreciate the raw power for a moment?" "I could if I had someone to share it with." Robert's voice was barely audible over the storm, but Theresa heard the meaning beneath the words. She turned from the window to face him fully. "Robert, I need to tell you something. My contract ends in 3 weeks. I've been trying to decide what to do next, where to go. But the truth is, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave this place, this work, or you." Robert set his coffee cup down with a clatter, his full attention on her. "You don't have to leave. Stay. Not just for the rest of the harvest, but after. Stay through winter and beyond. Stay as long as you will have this place, have me." "What are you asking?" Theresa's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I'm asking you to let this ranch be your home. Let me be your partner in building something lasting. I'm asking if what I feel, this connection between us, is something you feel too." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I'm saying I'm in love with you, Theresa Owens, and I think I have been since you stepped off that wagon with your chin up and determination in your eyes." Tears pricked Theresa's eyes, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of finding what she had not even known she was searching for. "I feel it too. I've tried to stay professional and distant, but I can't stop thinking about you, about a future here with you." Robert pulled her close, one hand cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "Then say you'll stay. Say you'll give us a chance to see where this could go." "I'll stay," Theresa whispered. "Through winter and beyond." He kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms wrapping around his neck. The storm raged outside, but inside, in that moment, everything was warm and right and perfect. A discreet cough from across the room broke them apart. Maria stood there with a knowing smile on her face. "About time, Mr. Robert. I was beginning to think you would never speak up. Now the storm is passing. The men can go to the bunkhouse, and Miss Theresa should get some rest in her cabin." "Tomorrow is another work day, yes," Robert laughed, embarrassed but happy. "Yes, Maria, thank you for the reminder." But as Theresa made her way through the drizzle to her cabin, Robert walking beside her with a lantern, everything felt different, charged with promise. At her door, he kissed her again, slowly and thoroughly, as if memorizing the taste and feel of her. "Sleep well," he murmured against her lips. "Tomorrow we start building our future." The remaining weeks of Theresa's contract passed in a blur of work and stolen moments, of growing closer and learning each other's hearts. Robert was courting her properly despite their unusual circumstances, bringing her wildflowers, walking with her in the evenings, sharing his dreams and fears and everyday thoughts. Theresa opened up in return, telling him about her childhood, her father's teachings, her mother who had died when she was young, her struggles after her father's death. They fit together seamlessly. Whether working side by side in the fields or sitting quietly by the creek. The other workers noticed and approved, having seen the positive change in their employer, the joy that had been missing from the ranch since Robert's mother passed away. Maria was delighted, already planning menus for a wedding feast that had not yet been proposed. When November arrived with its crisp mornings and early sunsets, the harvest was complete. Robert paid out the seasonal workers, thanking them for their labor and inviting them back next year. Most would drift to other jobs or return to families for the winter. A few, like old Howard, stayed year-round, helping with maintenance and winter preparations. On the evening of what would have been Theresa's last day, Robert asked her to meet him at the orchard after supper. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and red, and the air held the sharp promise of winter. Theresa found him waiting under the apple tree where he had given her that first fruit, so many weeks ago. "Theresa," he began, taking both her hands in his, "these past 2 months have been the best of my life. You've changed everything for me, made me see this place and my future in a whole new light. I know it hasn't been very long, but when something is right, you know it. I know it." He dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold ring from his pocket. "This was my mother's. She would have loved you, your strength and spirit and honest heart. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of building this ranch, this life, together as partners in all things?" Theresa was crying openly now, joyful tears she made no effort to hide. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Robert slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her with all the love and passion he had been holding back, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Sonora's small church. Maria stood as Theresa's witness, tears streaming down her face throughout the service. The ranch hands attended in their Sunday best, happy for the boss they respected and the woman who had proven herself one of them. The local preacher smiled benevolently as Robert and Theresa exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all seasons, through hardship and abundance, through every challenge life might bring. The wedding celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and abundant food that Maria had spent days preparing. Theresa wore a simple white dress that Maria had helped her make from fabric they bought in town, with wildflowers woven into her hair. Robert wore his best suit, looking both handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes, though his eyes never left his bride. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Robert led Theresa to the main house, which was now officially their home. He carried her over the threshold, a tradition he insisted on despite her laughing protests, and set her down gently in the bedroom they would now share. "My wife," he said wonderingly, as if testing out the word. "My partner, my love. My husband," Theresa replied, reaching up to cup his face. "My home." They came together with tenderness and passion, exploring and learning, giving and receiving. The intimacy was both thrilling and natural, cementing the bond between them. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking quietly about their hopes for the future, about the children they might have, about growing old together on this land they both loved. Winter arrived in earnest, bringing cold winds and occasional rain. The work shifted to indoor tasks and maintenance. Robert taught Theresa the business side of ranching, showing her the account books, discussing purchases and investments, treating her as the true partner he had promised she would be. Theresa brought her own skills to the partnership, improving efficiency in the kitchen and storage, suggesting crop rotations and soil improvements for the spring planting. They worked together repairing tools, mending tack, planning the next year's expansion. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, Robert reading aloud from newspapers and books while Theresa mended or knitted. Maria had moved into one of the spare rooms in the main house, part housekeeper, part family, teaching Theresa recipes and techniques passed down through generations. Sometimes, on particularly cold nights, Robert would play the guitar his father had given him, singing old Spanish songs in a rich baritone that never failed to move Theresa. She would join in when she learned the words, their voices blending as harmoniously as their lives had merged. By January, Theresa knew she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and some trepidation, knowing the dangers that childbirth could bring. But Robert was supportive and protective without being smothering, and Maria was a wealth of knowledge and reassurance. "You are strong," Maria told her firmly when Theresa expressed her fears. "You did harvest work in your condition without knowing it. You will do this too, and I will be here to help." As Theresa's belly grew, Robert became even more attentive, insisting she rest more, taking on tasks she used to do. But he also listened when she insisted on remaining active, understanding her need to contribute and remain useful. They compromised, finding a balance that honored both her capability and the need for caution. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and renewed activity. The ranch came alive again with seasonal workers arriving for planting. Theresa, now obviously pregnant, supervised much of the work from a chair under the oak trees, keeping track of supplies and coordinating tasks. The workers accepted her authority without question, having heard stories from the previous year's crew about her skill and determination. Robert was building an addition to the house, creating a proper nursery for their child. He worked on it every spare moment, sawing and hammering with focused intensity. Theresa would watch him from the window, her hand resting on her swollen belly, marveling at how her life had changed in less than a year. "Your father is a good man," she would whisper to the baby moving inside her. "He will teach you about the land, about honor and hard work. And I will teach you about thinking for yourself, about being strong and choosing your own path. Together, we will give you everything we did not have." In late August, as the harvest was beginning again, Theresa went into labor. Maria immediately took charge, sending Robert for the doctor in town while she prepared the bedroom. The labor was long and difficult, testing Theresa's strength and courage. Robert returned with the doctor and then paced outside the door, unable to be still, worry etched into every line of his face. As dawn broke, filling the room with soft light, a baby's cry pierced the air. Maria opened the door, her face wreathed in smiles. "A son, Mr. Robert. You have a strong, healthy son, and your wife is well." Robert rushed into the room, finding Theresa exhausted but glowing, cradling a small bundle in her arms. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Meet your son, Robert. Meet Thomas Navarro." Robert approached slowly, almost reverently, looking down at the tiny red face of his son. "He's perfect. You're perfect. Thank you, Theresa. Thank you for this gift, for choosing to stay, for making me the happiest man alive." He sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping his arms around his wife and son, his own tears falling freely. "I love you both so much." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful. Thomas was a hungry, demanding baby who kept his parents awake many nights. but watching him grow and change, seeing features that were a blend of both parents, was endlessly fascinating. Robert was a devoted father, helping with middle-of-the-night feedings, walking the floor when Thomas was fussy, singing Spanish lullabies that had been sung to him. Theresa recovered her strength gradually, balancing the demands of motherhood with her continued involvement in running the ranch. It was not easy, and there were moments of frustration and exhaustion. But there was also profound satisfaction in building this life, this family, this legacy. On a crisp afternoon in October, exactly 1 year after the storm that had brought them together as a couple, Theresa stood in the orchard holding Thomas, now plump and alert at 2 months old. Robert came up behind her, wrapping his arms around both of them. "Do you remember what you said that night?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "About the storm being magnificent and terrifying. I remember everything about that night. That's what this year has been, magnificent and terrifying and absolutely perfect." He kissed her temple, then gently took Thomas from her arms, holding his son against his chest with practiced ease. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you had never answered that advertisement, if you had gone somewhere else, if we had never met." "Don't," Theresa said, turning to face him. "We did meet, I did come here, and everything since has been exactly what was meant to happen. Do you have regrets about giving up your independence, your freedom to choose your own path?" Theresa reached up to touch his face, her love for him written plainly in her expression. "I chose you, chose this life. That was my decision, freely made, and I would make it again every single day. This is my path, Robert. You and Thomas and this ranch are exactly where I am meant to be." As if understanding his mother's words, Thomas made a contented sound, his small hand wrapping around Robert's finger. They stood together under the apple trees, a family forged from circumstance and choice, from harvest work and winter storms, from bravery and love. The years passed with the rhythm of the seasons. Thomas grew from baby to toddler to young boy, learning to walk between the rows of crops, his laughter echoing through the orchard. When he was 3, a sister arrived, Maria Rose, named for the 2 women who had helped shape their family. 2 years later, another son, James, completed their family. The ranch prospered under Robert and Theresa's joint management. They expanded the orchard as Robert had always dreamed, added cattle as he had planned, built a larger barn and proper irrigation systems. Theresa's suggestions and innovations proved as valuable as Robert's experience, and together they created something neither could have achieved alone. The children grew up understanding the value of hard work, seeing both their parents labor side by side, learning that love meant partnership and respect as much as affection. Thomas showed his father's affinity for the land, while Maria Rose had her mother's head for figures and planning. James was the dreamer, always asking questions about the world beyond the valley, and his parents encouraged his curiosity while grounding him in the realities of ranch life. Through drought years and abundant harvests, through challenges and triumphs, Robert and Theresa built a life of substance and meaning. They never forgot how they had met, how a simple advertisement seeking harvest workers had brought them together. Every year on the anniversary of Theresa's arrival, Robert would pick an apple from that same tree in the orchard and present it to her, a reminder of beginnings and promises kept. On their 10th wedding anniversary, with the children finally asleep after much excitement and storytelling, Robert and Theresa sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sun set over the valley. The autumn air held that familiar crispness, the light that particular golden quality that always made Theresa think of her first days in California. "You ever miss Missouri?" Robert asked, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "No," Theresa said without hesitation. "Missouri was where I came from, but California is where I was meant to be. This ranch, this family, this is home in every sense that matters." "I was so nervous that day you arrived," Robert admitted, chuckling at the memory. "This beautiful, determined woman stepping off that wagon, and I was supposed to treat her like just another worker. I think I knew then, in some part of me, that you were going to change everything." "I was terrified," Theresa confessed. "I had gambled everything on a newspaper advertisement, traveled across the country alone, and had no idea what I was going to find. Then I saw you, and something just clicked into place. It took me weeks to work up the courage to ask you to stay. I kept telling myself it was too soon, that you would think I was taking advantage, that I needed to be professional. But during that storm, watching you be so fearlessly yourself, I could not keep quiet anymore." "Best storm of my life," Theresa said with a smile. "Best decision I ever made, saying yes." Robert turned her face toward his, kissing her with the depth of feeling that a decade together had only strengthened. "I love you, Theresa Navarro. Thank you for coming to work the harvest. Thank you for staying through winter and beyond." "I love you too, Robert. Always." As darkness fell and stars began to emerge, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about their plans for the coming year, about the children's futures, about growing old together on this land they had built into a legacy. Inside the house, Maria was surely cleaning up after the anniversary dinner she had insisted on preparing, and in their rooms, 3 children slept soundly, secure in the love and stability their parents had created. The ranch stretched out around them, the fruits of years of hard work and partnership. Fields that would be planted again in spring, orchards that would bloom and bear, animals that would be tended and raised. But more than the physical property, more than the successful business, they had built something intangible and infinitely more valuable. A true home, filled with love and purpose, and the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. As the years continued to unfold, that foundation only grew stronger. Thomas, at 16, was already taking on significant responsibilities around the ranch, showing the same dedication his father had at that age. Maria Rose, at 13, kept the account books with her mother, already improving systems and suggesting efficiencies. James, at 11, split his time between ranch duties and books, dreaming of becoming a teacher someday, a dream his parents supported wholeheartedly. Robert's hair had begun to gray at the temples, distinguished silver mixing with the dark. Theresa's face showed the lines of years spent in the sun, but her eyes remained bright with the same determination that had carried her across the country at 22. They moved together with the easy synchronicity of people who had spent years learning each other's rhythms and needs. On a spring morning, 20 years after Theresa first arrived in Sonora, she stood in the orchard during bloom time, surrounded by clouds of white and pink petals. The trees Robert had planted during their first years together were now mature and productive, exactly as he had envisioned. Their children were helping with the spring planting, their voices carrying across the fields as they worked and laughed together. Robert found her there, as he often did, knowing she used this place to think and remember. He slipped his hand into hers, comfortable and familiar. "You know what today is?" Theresa asked. "April 15th. Spring planting." "It's also the day I mailed my response to that harvest worker advertisement 20 years ago. I was sitting in my aunt's parlor, feeling trapped and desperate, and I saw those few lines in the newspaper. Harvest workers needed in Sonora, California. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to respond." Robert squeezed her hand. "Thank God you did. Thank God you were brave enough to take that chance." "I was so scared," Theresa admitted. "I had never done anything like that before, never defied my aunt, never traveled alone. But something in me knew I had to try, had to see if there was a different life possible." "And you found it." "I found everything," Theresa corrected, turning to look at him. "I found work that fulfilled me, land that captured my heart, a community that accepted me, and a man who loved me as an equal partner. I found a home, Robert, not just a place, but a true home." "We built it together," Robert said, pulling her close. "Everything we have, everything we are, we created together." Maria, their daughter, came running through the orchard, her long braids flying behind her. At 13, she was beginning to look more like a young woman than a child, and both parents felt the bittersweet ache of time's passage. "Mama, Papa, come quick." Thomas found something while plowing the north field. He thinks it might be old gold mine tailings. If there's gold on our property, we could be rich. Robert and Theresa exchanged amused glances, remembering the gold fever that had built Sonora decades ago, and the hard lessons many had learned about quick riches versus honest work. "We're already rich," Theresa told her daughter, gesturing at the blooming orchard, the productive fields, the home they had built. "Real wealth is not in gold you dig from the ground. It's in the life you build, the people you love, the legacy you create." Maria considered this, then nodded slowly. "But we should still go look at what Thomas found. If it is gold, we could expand the ranch even more, maybe buy the Henderson property to the west." Robert laughed, delighted by his daughter's practical business sense. "You're absolutely right. Come on, let's go see what your brother discovered." As they walked back to the fields together, Robert and Theresa with their arms around each other, their daughter dancing ahead, Theresa felt a profound sense of contentment. The scared young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 20 years ago would barely recognize the person she had become. A successful rancher, a devoted wife, a loving mother, a respected member of her community. But the core of who she was had not changed. She was still the woman who needed to make her own choices, who valued independence and partnership equally, who found meaning in hard work and honest living. She had simply found a place and a person where those qualities were celebrated rather than suppressed. The years continued their steady march. Thomas married a neighboring rancher's daughter when he was 23, and they built a house on the eastern portion of the property, extending the family ranch while creating their own space. Maria Rose studied accounting through correspondence courses and took over complete management of the ranch's finances, her sharp mind saving them money and identifying opportunities for growth. James did become a teacher, opening a school in Sonora that served ranching families throughout the valley, bringing his mother's belief in education to the community. Robert and Theresa became grandparents multiple times over, their home often filled with small children who loved hearing stories about how their grandparents met, how grandmother had come from far away to work the harvest, how grandfather had asked her to stay through winter and beyond. On their 30th anniversary, the entire extended family gathered for a celebration. The ranch had grown to encompass over 500 acres, employing dozens of workers, producing crops and cattle that were shipped throughout California. But more important than the business success was the family legacy, the values of hard work, partnership, and respect that Robert and Theresa had instilled in their children and grandchildren. As the celebration wound down and guests departed, Robert and Theresa escaped to their favorite spot in the orchard, now old trees that still produced reliably every year. The autumn evening was perfect, clear and cool, with stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. 30 years, Theresa said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday I stepped off that stagecoach, so nervous and hopeful. Other times, I can barely remember my life before this place before you. You have any regrets? Robert asked, the same question he had asked periodically throughout their marriage. Not a single one, Theresa replied firmly. Every choice I made led me here to you, to this life. If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a thing. Robert pulled a slightly bruised apple from his pocket, presenting it to her with a courtly bow that made her laugh. For you, my love, may we have 30 more years together in this place we built. Theresa accepted the apple, biting into it and savoring the familiar taste. To 30 more years, to the harvest that brought us together, and to having the courage to ask someone to stay. To having the courage to say yes, Robert added, kissing her softly. They remained in the orchard until the stars filled the sky, talking about their children's futures, their grandchildren's personalities, their plans for the ranch. But mostly they simply sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, whose love had been tested by time and strengthened by partnership. As they finally rose to return to the house, walking arm in arm through the familiar landscape, Theresa thought about the young woman she had been, reading that advertisement in a St. Louis parlor. She wished she could tell that frightened girl that it would all work out, that the risk would be worth it. That life had extraordinary things in store if she could just be brave enough to reach for them. But perhaps that girl had known, had sensed that California held her future even when she could not imagine what form it would take. Perhaps that was why she had taken that leap of faith, why she had answered the call to come work a harvest in a place she had never seen. And perhaps that was the greatest gift she could offer her children and grandchildren. The example of choosing possibility over certainty, of building something meaningful through partnership and hard work, of creating home not through luck or inheritance, but through courage and love. The ranch would continue beyond Robert and Theresa, passed down through generations who would add their own chapters to the story. But the foundation would always be those crucial moments when a woman answered an advertisement, when a man asked her to stay, when two people chose each other and built a life that exceeded anything they could have achieved alone. In the main house, lamps glowed warmly, and Maria bustled about preparing tea, even though she was now in her 60s and officially retired from housekeeping duties. Some habits ran too deep to break, and taking care of the Navarro family had been her joy for so many years. As Robert and Theresa entered their home, surrounded by the artifacts of 3 decades together, photographs of children and grandchildren, furniture they had built or bought together, books they had read and shared, they felt the weight and gift of a life well lived. "Come to bed," Robert said softly, taking Theresa's hand. "Tomorrow starts another season." "Tomorrow and all the tomorrows after," Theresa agreed. Together, as always. They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, their steps slower than they once were, but still steady, still sure. Through the windows, the ranch spread out in the moonlight, testament to what could be built when opportunity met courage, when hard work met vision, when love met partnership. And somewhere in Missouri, perhaps another young woman sat in another parlor, reading another advertisement, wondering if she dared take a chance on an unknown future. Theresa hoped she would. Hoped she would find her own version of what Sonora, California had offered. A place to grow, work that mattered, and love that transformed everything. The story that began with a stagecoach arriving in a dusty mining town had become a legacy that would endure for generations. All because a woman came to work the harvest, and a cowboy asked her to stay through winter and beyond. And most importantly, because both were brave enough to say yes to the possibility of love, to the adventure of partnership, to the challenge and reward of building something lasting together. As they settled into bed, Robert pulled Theresa close, her head resting on his shoulder in the familiar position they had shared for 3 decades. Through the open window, the night sounds of the ranch drifted in, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the orchard, the hooting of an owl. "I love you," Robert whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Theresa replied, "now and always through every season." They drifted into sleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found their perfect match, their true home, their greatest adventure in each other. The harvest that brought them together had yielded fruits beyond measure. Love, family, legacy, and the deep satisfaction of a life built on honest work, mutual respect, and enduring devotion. And in the orchard, the apple trees stood sentinel, marking the place where their story truly began, where a simple gift of fruit had symbolized all that would follow. Those trees would bloom again come spring, as they had for years and would for years to come, enduring symbols of growth, patience, and the sweet rewards of tending what matters most with care and dedication.